The IP address?
The website, globalcommunity.et.edu. So make sure you get the document for Lab 2 and Lab 3, because we're going to go over those two today. But before we start going into Lab 2, we're going to talk a little bit. We realized that, and we all went through the same thing when we took the class last year or in years past, as to why are we using HyperMesh? Why do we have to learn a whole new program that's not very user-friendly? What does it actually do? So today we're just going to give I'm going to give a quick demo about one of the amazing things that HyperMesh does and the reason why we're using it. So it's through the, I'm not sure, has Dr. Jensen lectured about optimization yet? I don't think he has he? Okay, he'll go over more of this when he does in a couple weeks, but I think screen. So this is a video. If you just Google OptiStruct, so HyperMesh is the meshing program, and OptiStruct is the solver that it uses to solve optimization problems. So here's an example that they have. This is just a video on YouTube it's an example through like a wing strut. This is the front of a wing that they did for Boeing, I believe, and this is one of the tutorials that HyperMesh does, OptiStruct does. So they have everything here in the yellow. This is all design space here, and they want to make the lightest structure through there. So they know what kind of loads are going on it, and when they run the optimization, this is what will happen, is it'll find the best load paths are through here. So if they design the struts going through there, pull this back a little bit, then that's the optimal structure, the lightest weight while still carrying the same loads. So another thing, Jared and I actually both worked at Altair over the summer, the makers of HyperMesh and OptiStruct, and I did a quick example of what OptiStruct can do on a bridge. So here, if you see, this is just a picture I took of a big block, and down here it's constrained at the corners, so in other words that's where it's going into the ground, and it has a load being pushed down from the top. Everything yellow won't take away, but it'll eat away as much as it can from the green. And so this is the end result of showing the stresses, and this is what it produced. So I mean, it seems pretty, personally I think it's amazing because it made something that we've all seen that looks like a bridge, but it is the optimal design for this. When I constrained it to only allow it to have, I think, 30% of the original material and still make the stiffest structure possible, and this is what it produced. So we're going to use this on some of the parts because we're going to find out what is the design space, how much room do we have to design this part, and then we're going to set up the optimization for it to find what's the stiffest structure at a certain percentage of material, like 25% or something. And so you'll be able to see what is the best design for that certain part, whether it's a control arm or even the chassis or other parts like that. So does that help at all? So that hopefully is one reason why we are using Okay, so now that it's worth it to learn HyperMesh because HyperMesh and OptiStruct are very powerful programs that can do an amazing stuff. My boss at Altair even said that they sometimes like for design competitions at schools when they do like a bridge building, make it out of balsa wood. He's heard of schools that outlaw the use of OptiStruct because it'll tell you what's the best bridge to build or whatnot, or anything like that. So this is some stuff. We're going to touch on this later in a couple of weeks. We're going to do labs with this, and Dr. Jensen is going to lecture more about it. So hopefully that explains a little bit as to why we need to learn HyperMesh and OptiStruct, because it does some really cool stuff. So looking at lab 2 now. Hope you all have it. We tried to clarify a couple things in the labs, just FYI. In the check boxes, talking about what you submit, we've included whether it's a group submission or an individual submission. So that should clarify whether you need to turn that in by yourself or your group needs to turn it in. And also we've decided to simplify things. We're just going to make everything do the following lab. So both in-class submissions and the homework assignments will be due before the following lab. So in this case, since we're doing both lab 2 and 3, everything on here that you need to turn in is due then, not at the end of class today. Does that make sense? Is that okay? Question, Bill?
So we have like lab 2 from last week that you sent us. Is that the one? Is it the same, or did you send us a new one?
There's a new one, and you can get the new ones from the Team Center website. We're not going to send them out anymore. We just sent them out because the website was down there. Jared, what's the password to get on TCC?
471_ TCC1 exclamation point.
Mind writing it up? Okay. Are there any questions up to this point?
What is the password?
That's what he just said.
Yeah,
That's what he's writing on the board.
it's written.
Because I've tried that and it does not work.
Are you in?
I've tried both capitals and lowercase.
I've been asked to try this before lab. Come see me. If it doesn't work, come see me.
So, all right. So, like we mentioned about, because we're going on to lab 2 now. Since we're having problems still with Team Center Engineering, we're going to do lab 2 using Team Center Community, using this website, because it has capabilities to download and upload files. And so, in the activity that the in-class exercise we're going to do, we're just going to have you do it and then upload files and download them and do it that way. So the idea, what we're going to do is if you follow along, number 1 says, hold a Skype team conference where you discuss who will build which of the following parts. So you make a cylinder, an extruded rectangle, a sphere, a cone, a vase, and a flat plate. And so you're going to make this into an assembly. These are all the parts that everyone's going to make. You put it into an assembly and fit it all together. And then each person is going to open up someone else's part and modify it. And then open up the assembly again and show that there's been a modification. Does that make sense? So you're going to make a part and then you're going to modify someone else's part.
The vase supposed to fit anywhere?
The vase, let me see. I don't know.
Fit on that plate, don't they?
Fit on the plate, yeah. I guess just find them.
For the, okay.
I guess.
Okay.
Find a way. Be creative, I guess. Any other questions? Okay. After we do that, then so the lab talks about Dropbox, but we're also having a problem with Dropbox. So.
No.
Oh, Dropbox.
You can access it via the web. It'll work.
Right. Are we going to do TCC or are we going to do Dropbox?
We're going to do Dropbox.
Okay, we're going to do Dropbox instead. So go ahead and, so follow the lab. It says you model your part, upload it into Dropbox, and then download it, put it into an assembly, and then modify someone else's part and show that you did that. And then at the end we're going to ask, so I guess, can anyone right now maybe describe, like, why are we doing this? How is this going to help us in our project? By doing this simple exercise of making an assembly, modifying someone else's part. Why are we doing this? How is this going to help?
Collaboration.
Go ahead.
We'll learn how to do what we're going to be doing later.
Yes, and what are we doing later?
We're making assemblies and modifying each of the parts.
Right, we're going to be using a car, and there's going to be lots of parts and lots of sub-assemblies. And so having the capability to at least having a little bit of practice of changing other people's parts and just working with an assembly as a group and not just as your own assembly is going to be very useful. So that's why this simple exercise will just get us all familiar with this. Okay. So we will do that. That's the lab. That's the in-class exercise for 2. And then the homework, do another interview. I'm looking at number 1 here on the homework on page 2. There's another tutorial for HyperMesh 2060, creating and editing solid geometry. If you need the part for that, the .hm file, it's on TCC, so you can download it from there. And then there's also another, you should do a meeting, and you should go over improving team performance, which is a PDF file on TCC as well. And you'll talk about that, and there's a group submission described in number 3 of the homework assignments of Lab 2. And then,
Real quick note too, when you guys are sharing things with the TAs, you only need to share it with the DYE 471 email. You don't need to share it with each individual TA's email.
right, yes, thank you.
Repeat that.
Yeah, so there was an email sent out this morning that talked about that, among other things. On some of the labs, it says share this with the TAs and Dr. Jensen. Sometimes it says at this email address. Whenever they say share it with the TAs and Dr. Jensen, that just means share it with the 471 email. And as well as when you share a document, there's a box in that little dialog box, a checkbox that says also send them an email notifying that you've shared it with them. Go ahead and uncheck that box, because we're gonna see all the documents, and we don't need to receive email notifications that you submitted them. Does that make sense? So that just helps us out a little bit. Okay, does anyone have a question on Lab 2 up to this point about what to do?
I still am having trouble getting on to.
Come talk to me.
Yeah, just come up here and we'll take care of it. Anything else about Lab 2? Okay, I'm going to quickly go over Lab 3 as well, which is going to be really quick, and then we're just going to spend the rest of the time doing these things. Lab 3 says, so number 1, basically Lab 3 is a lot of more team building stuff. There's several conferences you're going to do with your teammates, so you call them, you have a group call, and you talk about who's going to do what. So you're going to make a presentation. Number 1 talks about a PowerPoint slide you make that describes who has what responsibilities in your group, and number 2 is you're going to make a similar Excel spreadsheet that goes into more detail about who's going to do what, as well as number 3 of the in-class exercises of Lab 3 talks about some material properties and weight measurements that you've taken of these different parts. So those two, you can get those 2 done at the same time, but there's just 2 different submissions. There's a PowerPoint slide and a spreadsheet you turn in, which are similar. Okay, and it's explained on Lab 3. And then the homework exercises, do another interview with someone from your group, and do tutorials. HyperMesh 3200, which is TET meshing, and 3220, which is doing a hex mesh. And then you also do one more thing. You do a Making Meetings Productive PDF, and you go over as a group, and you create a Google Doc entitled Effective Meeting Plan Team Number. And then it outlines what you will do before, during, and after team meetings, so make them as effective as possible. So, and that is all explained on that. So a lot of the stuff in Lab 3 is just meetings and planning with your car, with your group. So does anyone have a question about that? Go ahead.
We'll both do next Wednesday.
Yes, both of these labs will be due before lab starts next Wednesday. Everything on these. Any other questions? Okay, let's get started. Go ahead and start working on Lab 2.